now, as I try to regather my thoughts here, let's move to something that I basically have been setting up since we started this version of Anchor Watch. So, the instruments of national power. That is basically that term refers to how the United States of America has done business since the end of World War II and became the superpower of the world. Okay. And I have had guests on our program the last few weeks that covered these things. When you hear the term dime, and believe me, you can add more terms to it. And there are people who study this stuff for a living that have added more time and more things, more terms to this. But dime stands for diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. So when I had Ambassador Brink on, he covered the diplomatic piece. When I had Miss Juliet Jeske for Decoding Fox News, he helped us cover the informational piece. Me being a retired Navy commander, I cover the military piece, and then we had Dr. Charles Ballard on to talk about the economic piece. And the reason I wanted to lay out all of this for you guys, all these subjects that we have talked about, go into how the United States operates internally and how they operate externally. This has been taught for decades to military officers, to federal officials, various people within the United States government. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because instead of just sitting there saying, oh man, this current administration is jacked up, they're doing this, that, and the other, I'm going to show you specifically how their policies is upending this entire concept and why the world is now looking at us like we're crazy because they too understand this concept. Okay. So let's go to the first slide on this. Diplomatic power. Okay. Diplomatic power is significant. To be honest, if we're doing it right, this should be the most powerful tool that the United States has. But what has happened since January 20th has been an erosion of our diplomatic credibility. We have reduced multilateral engagement. So that goes straight to NATO, that goes to, World Trade Organization, that goes to anything that deals with multinational arrangements, to include specifically, as someone just mentioned in chat, USAID, which by far was one of our strongest, as we say, soft power arms that we have ever had as a country. It's gone. The strained alliances between the United States, NATO, and the European Union, by the way, our strongest and longest serving allies, have basically gone out the window. The EU and NATO in particular are having to make decisions without the United States input. And to be completely honest, they're not thinking about how we will perceive things because they know they cannot rely on what is happening here domestically. Okay. Now, while we're eroding that power, we are now more tight with authoritarian leaders. To be honest, the things that Trump has said about North Korea, Russia in particular, heck, many can argue that the way Bibi Netanyahu is acting right now, he's becoming more authoritarian, and Trump is not really saying much to stop it. All of these things have a cumulative effect where the world sees us with a less credible diplomatic voice. That should concern everybody. Next slide. Now, informational power. This is fascinating because informational power 25, 35, 45 years ago never could conceive the power of social media. And ever since Barack Obama, the government has really harnessed that leg of information in ways we have never before seen. So much so that social media has had a direct input on our elections and our policies. We've seen things change in America as far as how we see, for example, gay marriage. 20 years ago wasn't even on the docket. Now it's a real thing where overwhelmingly most Americans see no issues with it. That started on social media and migrated itself into actual domestic policy. Okay. When you look at other informational things like the State Department, right? They can't speak as much as they have because they have reduced their people. And what people don't understand about the State Department, whether you see them on TV or not, just their presence in a country, just their presence at an embassy makes a huge difference in how what we do is perceived abroad. And that is the number one conveyor of information in the diplomatic space at the actual location of the people we're trying to deal with, right? And because of this, because there is no consensus way of digesting information in America, like there was, say, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, where you had a Walter Cronkite or other anchors that were respected by both sides, there is no way for us to have a consensus on the information presented and what it actually means, keeping us in a perpetual state of divisiveness. And that is exactly what the current administration wants, because if America remains divided, it's much easier to manipulate different groups than it is the total American public. It is a strategy. It is a strategy that America and other people have used to break up other countries in the past. And it's starting to happen here. And then finally, the United States in the Trump administration era has zero credibility with the global media. Zero. They cannot trust any words that come out of President Trump's mouth. And anytime you see President Trump or any of his handpicked cabinet secretaries deal with the international media, you 9 times out of 10 will get very, very contentious questioning, because the international media does not play favorites with the Trump administration. They can't control what the international media says. And so much of the time, if you want direct responses to the questions we have domestically, we've got to go to a foreign correspondent like the BBC or DW or all these other groups abroad to get real answers, which is crazy to me. Next slide. Military power. So I'm not going to belabor this, even though obviously every instinct in my body wants to. You know, when you see what happens with your budget, your money, the time, et cetera, people are like, okay, this is a priority. And yes, you have seen an increase in defense spending. It makes a great headline. The United States is bulking up. They're going to deal with, negotiate from a position of strength because of the power of their military, et cetera, et cetera. However, the expansion of our military, the expansion of our budget, the willingness now to use force, as we saw with Iran, opens us up to something that people are not really talking about, and that is miscalculation. If any of our expanded military operations, our expanded defense, if anything happens where there's a miscalculation with a near peer or even someone that can be considered a foe, it could tip off something much, much larger. And this, along with the reduction of the diplomatic piece that I just talked about, raises the stakes dramatically as far as how America could literally tip the scales around the world. And when you factor in that we are reducing our willingness to work with our allies that we spent 80 years building relationships with, our single mindedness and our action to move forward without anybody helping us, where the United States will do this and dang it, everybody else will fall in line, is not just the height of arrogance, but it's dangerous, because in today's military environment, you almost always have to work with partners. And to sit there and say that the United States can win a conflict by itself, where the United States can isolate itself from its closest allies moving forward, is ridiculous. And it's dangerous. And there could be repercussions that the United States could never, ever recover from because of that arrogance. And we're seeing all of that policy-wise. And and by the way, we're kicking people out who want to serve. We're trying to treat people who don't have a certain look, that aren't white, male, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, heterosexuals. If they're not that, they don't seem to have the same value in our uniform. And so what's going to happen is, over the course of time, the groups that you relied on to fill the ranks, i.e., blacks, Latinos, females that are necessary. They're not going to sign up. And so when things really pop off, you can't rely on them. You won't have the numbers you need to actually do this whole thing, especially if you're trying to do it by yourself. None of this makes military strategic sense to me. None of it. None of it. Next slide. Economic power. Economic power. Now, this is the thing that people see the most because it has a direct effect of your pocketbooks, your quality of life, everything that you see moving forward. The expanded tariffs. There's a reason the United States did not have this policy for over 100 years. Trump has brought it back from the dead. McKinley did this at the turn of the 20th century, and believe you me, there were repercussions. And it was off and on in the first portion of the 20th century. And then, of course, the Gilded Age and the Roaring 20s ended and the Great Depression arrived. Okay. These were all things that fed into that. The reduction in trade agreements, where we at one point before Trump came in office had all these trade agreements that had been worked out over the period of decades, single-handedly went away when Trump ended all of them unilaterally. Okay. And then wanted each country to come with these different ideas. And you could see how serious the Trump administration took it when they had that first tariff meeting and they had that AI printout of all of these countries that are going to have tariffs and the percentages that they were going to have to include an uninhabited island. You knew then that they were not serious about economic policy. The only policy economically that they were all about is that last bullet, deregulation and tax cuts, which is what the one big beautiful bill gave you. The Congressional Budget Office yesterday said the wealth gap is going to grow quickly based on the bill that was just passed. So why does that matter? The basis of the American dream is no matter where you start out, you can be successful and move up social classes. The bill that they just passed kills that. Kills that. There are many that would argue that that was a thing before the big beautiful bill, but now it's accelerated. It's accelerated. And so everything that we're seeing economically has been geared for the top 1% to remain the top 1%, and for the rest of us to basically, at best, remain stagnant where we are, and for many of us to fall further behind. It's obvious the man knows nothing about economics, but here we are. Here we are. And so, next slide. Just to give you a little bit of comparative analysis on all of this, okay? His two predecessors, Obama and Biden, where Trump has zigged, they zagged. So Biden and Obama both believed in strengthening alliances, where Trump at best looks at bilateral agreements with each individual country the United States deals with. That may sound good on its surface, but to put together a comprehensive strategy and, to be completely honest, a coherent world order, you've got to move beyond just the bilateral piece. You just have to, which is what every president, Republican and Democrat, basically did before Trump. Information side of the house, Obama was all about goodwill. That's why he traveled as much as he did, repairing relationships from the Bush administration and putting America in a much more positive light. If you compare what people think of America during the height of the Obama administration and compare it till now with the Trump administration, it's a night and day difference. The polls are out there. I invite you to Google them. Now, military, Biden was actually way more about building coalitions even than President Obama was, right? He believed in NATO because as a senator for how many years, Biden did whatever he could to help strengthen NATO. Trump, it's all about unilateral because he wants no one taking the credit for America being the big dog on top. It's ego. It's that simple. It's that simple. And then finally, when it comes to economics, you see basically three different levels here. Obama was for about free trade because his mindset was economically all tides lift all boats. Biden was a little bit more balanced and selective. He had some protectionism in there, but he still was open to having a global trade market. Trump, you deal directly with the United States. There is no middle organizations. And what we say is what you will get. That simple. Because again, Trump looks at his success in dollars. From the time he was put on his father's board in the construction company to right now, that is the only metric that matters to him. Next slide. So, in conclusion, what you're seeing is basically the United States moving more to unilateralism, which is not the same as isolationism, where you're trying to cut yourself off from the world, but you just don't believe in building coalitions. You don't believe in being part of a group. You want to be revered. You want to be revered, right? And there is going to be some gains, right, and capability, especially when the manufacturing piece kicks off. But that's going to take years. That's going to take years. But the losses in soft power are going to be cataclysmic. They've already calculated with USAID going away and some of the World Health Organization funding the United States has pulled, 14 million people are going to die here in the next 2 to 3 years. 14 million. So just keep that in the back of your mind. You know, AIDS prevention, disease prevention, those type of things, right? And if we don't restore balance in the future, the United States on the international stage, you know, the stage that the United States swears up and down that we're the #1 country in the world, that's going to go away because other countries are not going to facilitate this mindset. It's that simple. That simple. And so while we look domestically and see every economic thing happening, benefiting a top 1%, to include now cryptocurrency can be used for your 401ks, seeing all of that happen, when you look at it in the big picture, what I just talked about, diplomatic, informational, military, economic, our national security and our instruments of power are at a crossroads. And the damage being done to it will take years to restore. Okay, sorry to be Debbie Downer on this Tuesday, but I wanted to lay out why some people are very concerned. Those of us who have been trained and taught to look at things from a holistic, strategic perspective, we have some significant issues with what's happening because we're not looking at everything in a vacuum. We're not looking at everything by headlines. We're looking at everything in a total picture way. Um, so, well, oh, thank you for that, Garrett. Uh, it's just the way some of us were trained. If you get to the senior levels of the military, the State Department, and stuff like that, you have to look at things from a total point of view. It keeps you steady. It keeps you balanced. You don't get too high. You don't get too low, but you think about the long-term effects of what's happening. So I just wanted to bring that to the forefront.